Well, there I was saying yesterday that it'll be interesting to see how Charles Leclerc goes in the Ferrari on the front row for the Brazilian Grand Prix proper, because then he won't have to waste too much time in traffic as he did in the sprint race. But he didn't even make the start. Very, very unusual to see something like that happen. Charles coming into the quick uphill right-hander. I feared for a millisecond that maybe when we got to the onboards, we were going to see him doing one of these and just losing it, as Fernando Alonso did once in the formation lap when he was driving for Renault, the European Grand Prix. I think it was at the Nürburgring. But putting that to one side very quickly, it was obvious that there was a mechanical failure of some sort. Charles immediately said hydraulic failure. We saw some smoke coming out from under the car because he wasn't doing one of those. He was actually going into that quite quick right-hander. And there's no way he'd just lose it there as he did. So Ferrari out even before the race had started. Terrible, really, for them. Mechanical drama like that. And might as well say it now, Carlos Sainz's race was plagued with mechanical dramas as well. Gear selection, clutch. Interesting that overnight Ferrari changed the clutch shims on both cars, because Ferrari has been, as I keep saying, usually make very good starts. They seem to have gone off the boil. And after the first start today, Carlos was on the radio saying, get rid of these clutches. When we get back to Maranello, there is obviously something wrong there. And then in the race, Carlos's performance affected by downshifts on the downshift paddle. So hydraulics, transmission problems, clutch problems, what is going on at Ferrari? Normally, this time of year, in the old days, let me say that, Ferrari used to miss some of these races because of the strikes in Italy in August having their ongoing effect and parts not being available. I'm sure it's not that these days, but it does seem odd that there's so much unreliability at Ferrari. Anyway, so Charles Leclerc's absence, of course, left a pretty big gap in the front row. So when Fernando Alonso pulled up, all he saw was clear road on his side of the grid. Lance Stroll obviously just ahead of him on the right. And behind Fernando, Lando, Norris. And Lando, learning, I guess, from what happened in the sprint race, just brilliant off the line. P2 out of the first corner. Really, really good. And Max Verstappen, obviously with nobody on his left, made a very clean and easy start from the pole to lead. So it was Max from Lando. The losers at this first start, very much Lance Stroll. And as the TV cameras were all over him because he was qualifying P3, you had this feeling that there's no way Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso were going to allow that to happen for too long. And indeed, that proved to be the case. Both of them got Stroll before the first corner or in the middle of the first corner. Good start by Lewis as well. But then there was a back of the midfield shunt, basically the two Hasses and Alex Albon's Williams. Yeah, what can I say? All fairly predictable going into a very, very tight left-hander, downhill left-hander. Something was bound to give. And bits of debris flying around. One of the Hasses hit the back of Oscar Piastri's McLaren, and it was repaired, but it was badly damaged. And a flailing tyre from Kevin Magnussen's Haas hit the back of Daniel Ricciardo's AlphaTauri. Both of those cars restarted from the pit lane, damage repaired, probably 80%, 90%. Really good work, as ever, by all the Formula One pit crews, but that caused a delay and everybody could think about what was going to happen next. And what we were going to see, in effect, was a kind of rerun of what we saw in the sprint. On this occasion, Max was on the pole, Lando was P2, Lewis P3, really good, and then P4, Fernando Alonso, again showing how strong the Aston Martin is, and as I say, gazumping his team leader, team owner, team partner, I don't know, into the first corner. So yeah, all set for a pretty interesting Grand Prix, but without Charles Leclerc, of course. On this occasion, Max again made a really good start down into turn one, but Lando Norris was right there with him, and got to say here, basically applied pressure on Max throughout the Grand Prix. Again, we don't know exactly how much Max had in hand, but suffice to say that when Lando set fastest lap of the race on soft tyres in the last stint, there were two stops. They started on soft, they went to medium, and they went back to soft. Max didn't respond at that point. He was leading by about 8 seconds and just allowing Lando to find 2 or 3 tenths a lap. There was not a lot of room in which to play. And that's what happened as they crossed the checkered flag, an 8-second gap. And it was interesting to see how Max controlled that. And again, this has become a bit of his DNA, a bit of his trademark, really, I think, that in the first phase of all the stints, he was so good at looking after the tyres, to the extent that in possibly 2 out of the 3 sectors, Lando would be slightly quicker. Sometimes Lando's lap time would be quicker, and then Max would go a tenth here, a tenth there, pull out a little bit. So patient, so well managed in terms of how he was going to win this Grand Prix. He said afterwards there's a lot of wind out there, it was gusty, and occasionally he was having big moments in the car. Didn't really look like that from the outside. So good is Max's ability at keeping the car absolutely square to the road and looking after it generally. And he did have a slight top speed advantage. When they were out of the DRS, usually he was about 2 kilometers, if not 3 kilometers an hour quicker on the two straights than Lando Norris. So that helped him a little bit. If Lando was closing on sector 2, Max could always rely on getting a little bit back on the two sectors, sectors 1 and 3. So it was close. It was really close. So all credit to McLaren, who had Red Bull panicking a little bit towards the end when Max came in for his second set of soft tyres, if you like, after his second stop. And Lando kept going. And for a lap or two, Red Bull thought, wow, Lando Norris is going to go one stop. We better, we'll let Max know. And it was something like 8 seconds with 12 laps to go. He would have got him probably, but it would have been a DRS pass. It would have been something that you wouldn't necessarily have wanted to introduce at that stage of the race. And don't forget the McLaren is a quick car all round. So, but then a lap later, Lando came in and went to the soft tyres as well. And at that point, you knew that it was just a question of Max managing as he does. I mean, this word management is used so much. To me, it's a cliche because what it really encompasses is the way a driver like Max Verstappen can balance all the dynamic weights of the car, and other drivers aren't. I think that's what we saw with George Russell today, who went through the tyres pretty quickly and making the point quite early in the race. And I've got to say here, Mercedes were nowhere today, but making the point quite early in the race that he was managing the tyres, he wasn't going to push too hard, and then getting a bit irritable on the radio about Lewis's pace and are they trying to help one another or are they racing for themselves? Lots of chat going on like this from George. And when he was behind Lewis, I know we're jumping a little bit, when he was behind Lewis mid-race, and both of them are on medium tyres now, it was an interesting comparison between the two because Lewis was saying the car feels pretty terrible. The temperatures aren't right. There's a sweet spot. There's no sweet spot there around which I can drive. Everything's difficult. And George was leaning on the car a lot, and he was actually getting into the corners quite early compared with Lewis. Not a difficult thing to do around Interlagos because there are so many tight corners in the middle section, and then of course there's the rest of it's pretty quick anyway, pretty line locked. And George was there leaning on the car, and I think rather than George having short corners, turning in early, I think what we really saw there was Lewis Hamilton being a little bit more circumspect because of the way the car felt. He was just making sure he got all his braking done in a straight line before he got into the corner. And that's what he did pretty well. And he brought the car home, but it was not good. Not a good day for Mercedes. Beaten not only by Ferrari, a lame Ferrari, but also by, would you believe, Pierre Gasly's Alpine. Beautiful drive by Pierre Gasly. That's not to detract from his drive, particularly as he had something in his eye and he couldn't see out of more than one eye over the last 10, 15 laps of the race. Really good drive. Both Alpines indeed in the points, but good drive by Pierre Gasly. So Mercedes came away from this race thrashed by McLaren Mercedes, their customer team, thrashed by Aston Martin Mercedes, another of their customer teams, and beaten by Alpine Renault as well. Toto Wolff on the radio right at the end to Lewis saying, Lewis, this is unacceptable. We can't go from where we were to where we are now in one race. Well, Aston Martin did. Aston Martin went from nowhere to where they were in Brazil. So that's one counter to that point. But then beyond that, it's not as if Mercedes have been anywhere anyway. Yes, occasionally they find sweet spots, and yes, occasionally they get good podium finishes. But recently they haven't really looked like outracing McLaren, and that is the biggest problem they have. They can't even beat McLaren at the moment, let alone Red Bull. So it's not as if they're up and down. They're basically just finding sweet spots periodically. But it was not a good day. This was a terrible day for Mercedes, particularly in the light of what happened a year ago. George Russell winning this Grand Prix. Can you believe it? And then they weren't happy. So what they're going to be like now just doesn't bear thinking about. Anyway, getting back to the race at the front, the big race was really between Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez. Fernando Alonso, an excellent third for most of the race, give or take the pit stops or two. Very good pit work too by Aston Martin. And a quick car. Not as quick as a McLaren, but definitely quicker than a Mercedes. Much quicker in a straight line, and at least as much, if not more, grip around the corners. And Fernando Alonso driving absolutely brilliantly, I thought. We often talk about how good Fernando is and what a great racer he is. He's not a short corner, early turn-in driver. He's a V driver more than anything else. Not to the extent of Sebastian Vettel, but that's how he really wants to drive when he's got a great front end and rear end. And the car was pretty well balanced today. And he was taking it to Sergio Perez. For many, many laps, Sergio Perez, having got past both Both Mercedes just blowing past them in a straight line. Mercedes so slow in the straight. Caught Fernando Alonso, this is Sergio Perez, and just couldn't get past. And I've been very defensive, I think, of Sergio's position at Red Bull. Yes, I've been critical of his driving. Not critical, I've been trying to explain the difference between him and Max Verstappen in style. But I haven't been critical of Red Bull's choice of Perez as a number 2 to Max, because I think he's the right sort of driver to have in that car if you've got Max Verstappen, as I've said a million times. But this is the first time, really, I've thought, maybe Red Bull should be thinking about somebody else, because he should have beaten Fernando Alonso today in the Aston Martin. And he did beat him for 1 lap. 2 laps to go from the end of the race. He actually used the DRS correctly and got past Fernando. But then he braked too late into turn 1, and Fernando is on the penultimate lap now. And Fernando got a run on him going down the hill, which is another DRS area, and repassed him. Talk about embarrassing. And a great move by Fernando, a hero of the crowd, probably driver of the day. I don't know, I haven't looked, but incredible for him to come back. Makes me think actually of that ridiculous race that he had in Abu Dhabi the year before DRS was introduced, when he was stuck behind Vitaly Petrov for the whole race and couldn't get past him, and basically blew the championship, I think, as a result of that. And there was Fernando saying, 1 race too early, we needed DRS. And now look at what DRS did for him. Without DRS, I don't think he would have got Perez down that back straight and retaken 3rd place. But he did. And he did it beautifully, and it was a very, very good result. Lance Stroll also drove well in the other Aston Martin. Very good weekend for Aston all round, and finished 5th in the end, 6 seconds behind Sergio Perez. All that gazumping business in the early phase of the race possibly left him with less tyre than Fernando Alonso, but he drove well and finished 5th. And Carlos Sainz, a very annoyed 6th. Not as annoyed as Charles Leclerc, of course, who was watching this from afar, probably at the airport by the time they took the checkered flag. But yeah, a terrible day for Ferrari, relatively speaking. Pierre Gasly 7th, as I say, great drive, beating Lewis Hamilton into 8th place. 9th, Yuki Tsunoda in the other AlphaTauri, doing a very good job again. And then 10th was Esteban Ocon in the other Alpine. Good day for Alpine all round. Not as good as Aston Martin, but a very good performance all round. Esteban, the only driver to attempt a 3-stop strategy, and both Alpines in the points, as I say. So another great win for Max. I don't think we really saw today how quick he was in that RB19. He was always, as you say, managing the car, but that was the beauty of his win, the way he was able to manage it, what he was doing with the car in the gusts of wind when the tyre deg was getting worse. But there was Max in the car looking totally metronomic around Sao Paulo. Not an easy thing to do, not an easy circuit on which to make it look so easy, but then again, that is the epitome of the art. So next race is the street race at Vegas. Looking forward to that. I've already got my Ferrari press badge, Las Vegas. First Grand Prix, 1981. I'm not sure Ferrari are giving me a press badge on this occasion, but yeah, looking forward to that. And I'll be doing some live streams next week in the build-up to that return, as Formula One returns to Vegas. Thanks to Jetcraft, thanks to Pitbox.io, and thanks to you for watching. See you soon.